Hey everybody, Dr. Eric Goodman here with Sean Yeager-Diamond, one of our foundation training core education team members. You'll meet him at certifications, you'll see him in videos. Today, we're going to do a really simple but surprisingly effective cycling warm-up. Before you ride your bike, do these exercises. Get really good at them, probably ride your bike a little better, a little more comfortable, maybe a little faster. Let's start with a spiral lunge, left foot forward, right foot back. The spiral lunge is a subtle movement. It starts with the feet at a very accurate square angle. They're facing forward, they're facing in the same direction. The back foot's not turned out, it's also not turned all the way in. Neutral, forward. It's all about how high you can lift up the base of your skull. So you'll notice that Sean is looking up first and then taking the back of his head and lifting to the same level that his chin gets up to. If he takes a big deep breath from this position, you'll notice that the front neck muscles, the SCM muscles, leverage the chest up, and that's when you know you're in the right head position. From here, it's a vertical lunge, so we're just going straight up and down. We're going to take the arms forward at about chest level, and all of the fingertips are going to touch. You're squeezing them together, but you're not straightening the joints. All the joints in the hand are bent. The wrist is spreading, the elbows are spreading. It's a very active arm position. In fact, even the shoulder and the lats are working. Take a big deep breath at the circumference of the torso here, and watch Sean's right hip move ever so subtly towards the inside of the left thigh. And his left leg is not going to move. It's like a pedestal. It's just standing there. It's standing very firmly as the right back hip moves inward towards it. That's going to create this subtle torso rotation. It's only a few inches. He's going to move just a little bit off center. And he's going to breathe as wide as he can, right where I'm touching, right at the lower edges of the rib cage. You're trying to widen and lift the rib cage with the next, let's say, 3 deep breaths. All the way in, using the neck muscles, using the torso muscles to expand the rib cage. Closing the legs like a pair of scissors. Standing as tall as you can. 2 more breaths just like that. It's expansive, it's decompression. You're not trying to decompress one little segment of your spine. You're trying to pull apart and decompress the entire torso. Upward, outward, all of it. From there, watch the subtlety as his hips come back to neutral. The torso comes back to neutral. And he's going to hinge by drawing that left hip backward behind him, sticking his butt back. From there, he's now loaded the posterior chain on that left side. The lower back is tight, the hamstring is tight. The pressure of his body weight is going through that left heel primarily. It ain't easy. Same spiraling, draw that back hip towards the front, and you'll notice a bigger movement as the pelvis rotates the torso. And all of a sudden, all that weight's going through the left hip and left heel, and the left glute muscle is absorbing the vast majority of your body weight. It's not easy. Hang on to it for another 2 deep breaths. Big deep breath. Into the ribs. Lift the ribs. Elongate the torso every time you inhale. 1 more. Try to go a little further, like you're trying to reach out to my hand, but you reach out to my hand by drawing your hip behind you. It creates even more tension at that glute on the left side. Now, using that glute, press your torso back to center and lift the torso back to neutral. As you step out of it. Shake your arms off, relax. Right leg forward, left leg back into that same spiral lunge. This is the very subtle one where it's an upward lift. The hips are square, the feet are in the same direction, but they're not on a balance beam. They're just facing in the same direction. If you want to check if your hips are square, put your thumbs facing forward and just make sure you're not all off kilter. Everything facing forward. Lift the base of the skull, pull the back of the neck long, and as you breathe in, make sure that these big SCM muscles are helping to elevate the torso, elevate the sternum. With the arms forward about chest level, keep breathing right between the shoulder blades, but don't allow the chest to drop as you're doing that. It's still a big elevation at the front of the chest, big elevation at the back of the rib cage as well. The front knee is bent, but it's not overly bent. It's not a runner's lunge. It's just unlocked, and the hip is taking the weight of the body. From there, kind of give a little scissoring towards the legs, pulling the front and back of the legs towards each other from very high up in the groin. Lift the base of the skull and watch as Sean's back hip moves ever so subtly towards the front inner thigh. As he does that, the torso will naturally rotate on the platform of the pelvis. It's not a spinal rotation, it's a pelvic rotation. And that's going to allow Sean to focus on breathing very deep and very wide, right into the lower edges of the lats. He's literally trying to lift the rib cage up and over his kidneys, up and off his obliques. You're trying to widen and elongate. It shouldn't feel easy. It should feel surprisingly difficult to get taller, wider at the torso. It should feel like it's an increasing struggle right between the groin muscles as the legs are squeezing towards each other. come back to center by allowing the pelvis to move back to neutral, and then we'll draw into a hip hinge by pulling that right hip back. It's not a spinal flexion and it's not a spinal extension. It's a hip joint movement backwards. The front knee is unlocked, but it's not overly bent, and the vast majority of your weight is on the right heel through a slightly unlocked knee, with the weight being absorbed into the hamstring, the glute, and the lower back. As you hinge, you're going to feel the lower back tighten. Keep the spine neutral and strong as you draw that left hip towards the right inner thigh again. So back hip towards the front leg. That's going to rotate your torso just a little bit more on axis, and all of a sudden that right glute, right posterior chain is just absorbing the vast majority of your body weight. It's a very important muscle for cycling. It's propulsion. Medial hamstring and glute, adductors and glute, they're so important for propelling your body forward, propelling your knees across the midline of the bar, making sure that the entire posterior chain is propelling your cycle forward. That's the way it works. Cycling's a pull, not a push. So make the pulley muscles work very well. Use the glutes to rotate back to center. Use the hamstrings to pull your torso back to center and neutral, and step out of this position. And we'll finish a relatively simple warm-up with one last exercise, a wide leg founder, where we're going to use all that material, all that muscle we just prepped. Take a few big deep breaths. Your legs will be shoulder width or wider. Your feet are ever so slightly turned in from the hips. So it's like the outside edges of the feet are parallel, not the inside edges. The entire footprint of the foot is on the ground, pressing into the ground, the whole perimeter of the foot, with a little bit of additional pressure at the heel. You're going to draw the hips back and the hands forward in a counterbalance that loads the posterior chain. As the hips draw back and unlock, the knees are going to unlock just a little bit, no straight legs. Your weight is in your heels and your hips are pulling as far behind your heels as you can. That should naturally take your torso up and forward. That's the hip hinge. We're now in an isometric posterior chain exercise that simply challenges your hip hinge. The more you can subtly, accurately come in and out of this, the better control you have of all these posterior chain muscles. So let's practice 2 or 3 times coming out of a founder position, using the hamstrings and the lower back, and then loading the founder position, loading the hamstrings, loading the lower back muscles, challenging them. Challenge them on the pull back, stretch the muscles, and then shorten those stretched muscles as you pull your weight forward. Let's go one more isometric. Bring the hands together in that sphere of tension. The entire arm is active. The wrists, the hands, the fingers, the elbows, the shoulders, the lats, the chest. All of these are challenging exercises. Foundation training is only as good as you do it, and as often as you do it. Draw the hips back a little tighter, load the posterior chain. Think about how good this ride is going to feel now that you have accurately prepped some of the most important muscles in your body. Use the posterior chain to come back to center. Put your helmet on. Have a good time. Hope it helps.